I don't actually think you have to spend time studying pitch accent at the expense of something else. Is Japanese pitch accent even a thing? Or is it just grift by unscrupulous teachers trying to make a quick buck off of their poor students' insecurities about their lousy accents? It's a hot day in the studio today. This is a hot topic on Reddit. I'm Brian from Emurse. Let's dive in. So is pitch accent even a thing, and should you bother studying it? My answer is yes and yes. The main reason is that if your pronunciation is bad, then people aren't going to be able to understand you in a conversation, no matter how good your grammar is. Secondly, it's kind of the reverse of that. The better you get at phonetics and practicing it, the better you will be at listening comprehension. It's also a nice thing you can do to just add some style to your overall presentation of yourself. And finally, it's fun. Studying a language is fun, and working on phonetics and your accent, it's a fun thing to do, and it's challenging. So let's dive into why you maybe shouldn't do it. Well, one of the common threads that came up on Reddit was that there's lots of different accents throughout Japan, and since you're a foreigner, people are going to immediately identify you as a foreigner. So why should you bother to try to work on the Tokyo pitch accent? Because that's the most common one that people study. And I have a good anecdote for that. So back in high school, I had an English teacher. He grew up in India and then spent some time in Germany and the UK before finally becoming a teacher in the US. And on the first day of class, he said, hey, I've got a really thick accent if you haven't noticed. So if you need to stop me at all to repeat myself, just go right ahead. And I think this is a great example of somebody that could spend a little bit of time on phonetics, especially the vowel sounds, because I think the problem that we had was that he was using several different vowel sounds and there was no continuity between them. And another point that came up on Reddit related to this is when you encounter somebody with a slight foreign accent, and it may be one that you're familiar with. For example, we have a lot of people from the Caribbean here, we have a lot of people from Mexico, and those are pretty common accents, and it's not difficult to understand folks even if they have a slight accent or even maybe a little bit of a thicker accent. But when you have an accent that doesn't have any context or make any sense, it can be more difficult to understand. And related to that is with pitch accent, Japanese people will notice. And there's an interesting study that compared foreign learners of Japanese to native speakers. And they did a couple of different aspects of that, where they looked at how well you hear the pitch accent and also how well you can reproduce it. With the foreign students, they were right around 50%. And so that means that it's kind of random chance, whereas the Japanese folks, regardless of where they might have been from, they were actually all from Tokyo, but they were able to get pretty close to 80% most of the time with the different drills and tests that they use. So that shows that even though they may not be able to quantify the pitch accent, they know that it's there and they can recognize it. And so what that tells me is that when you're speaking to a Japanese person, if you're not using the correct pitch accent, it's going to sound, something about it's going to sound a little bit off. And even if they can understand you, even if they can understand you, it could still feel a little awkward. And this leads me to another story. When I was first studying Japanese in college, I would go over to my friend's house. And his wife was from Japan and native Japanese speaker, so she would help us with our dialogues and our study practice. And I'd been practicing a little bit on my own, and I'd even been making my own multimedia flashcards in a program called Macromedia Director, where I could play the recording and look at the translation and the text, kind of like what we're doing in my new program. But anyway, I was practicing that on my own, and so I asked one day, how's my pronunciation? And she said, you sound really foreign. And I asked a couple of questions to try to drill a little bit deeper into that and figure out what I was doing wrong. And in my class, of course, we'd always been told Japanese is flat. And it wasn't until I reconnected with Japanese a number of years later, back in 2018, that I learned about pitch accent, and I started digging a little bit deeper into the phonetic side of things. And this kind of brings me to the other point of how much should you actually study, and Japanese learners when they actually have to learn Japanese. So that's kind of a funny little thing that somebody posted on Reddit, but I think it's a good segue into this topic, because if you look at a language like Japanese, phonetically, it's not, there's not too much different about it from, say, US English. The vowel space there's pretty much overlap in the vowel space, while the pitches of them will be a little bit different. But you take a language like Thai, for example, which has a much steeper learning curve on the phonetic side, because you've got 32 vowel sounds to learn plus the 5 tones. And so if your pitch is off, you will not be understood. So, for example, the word for rot in Thai is nao, and the word for cold is nao. One is low tone and one is rising tone. But if you mix those up, your pronunciation isn't good. You're not going to be able to be understood. And there's many words like that in Thai. There's even some in Japanese. For example, candy
ame,
and rain.
ame.
The pitch patterns on those two are different. So potentially, someone probably could get what you're saying within the context of a sentence. However, that's just an example where you might want to study a little bit. And I think that really gets down to the point of how much should you actually study? As I pointed out earlier, the bare minimum is being able to be understood. But you don't want to do that at the expense of studying grammar. But I don't think that you need to. And I think that's one of the points of confusion that came up on the Reddit thread. It seemed like people were like, well, why do I need to spend time studying pitch accent? I don't actually think you have to spend time studying pitch accent at the expense of something else. And this is one of the things that we try to do in Emurse, is make the learning experience more dense. So if you have something like Duolingo, which could be great for just jumping in and getting some basics down. But after that, you sort of hit a plateau, and it gets really frustrating. And back in 2018, I was using Duolingo, and I used it for about a month, probably, and that was probably about 3 weeks too long. And I started working with Anki, working in Audacity, recording myself, listening to it, and that was really helpful. And so that kind of led me to start building some of my own tools. And so what we're trying to do, getting back to what we're trying to do in Emurse, is make the language learning experience more dense. And by that, I mean, when you study vocabulary, you can also look at pitch accent. So we have the ability to display that pitch contour in any different exercise type that you want. So if you're going through the Japanese phonetics course, as you're going through the course, you could study the vocabulary that's in there. With the focus on memorizing the vocabulary. And that's how it'll show up in the review queue. It'll be flagged as I'm learning the meaning of this word. But you can also look at the pitch accent, and you can practice speaking it as you go through. And so in that way, you can kind of optimize your time and just have a more full learning experience. Paying money for stuff. Well, you don't have to pay money to learn Japanese phonetics and pitch accent. A great starting place is the Wikipedia article for our Japanese phonetics. And then you can download Audacity, you can record yourself, you can download a program called Prot, and you can look at the pitch curves. And you don't need to pay anything for that. Jisho, free online Japanese dictionary, has the simplified pitch graph for most things. And then with the combination of those three things, if you don't find the pitch accent in the dictionary, you can load it into Prot, and you can look at the actual curve. Because the simplified pitch graphs are good, but they're really just a representation of the main idea of the pattern. So I think looking at the pitch contour in Prot is the best way to do it. Now, I'll say one more thing about being charged money for stuff. I think it's worth it to pay somebody for something that's going to help you learn. They've spent time doing it so that you don't have to do it. I spent a ton of time fiddling around with various things. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to create Emurse in the first place, is I was just sort of tired of putting all these resources together for myself. So now we kind of bundle it up for you and put it into a neat package. And our creators are really working hard and spending a lot of time on the courses that they create. And at some point, you need to get paid for your work when you're doing it full time. So until we end up in the Star Trek situation where everything is based off of karma, I think we need to accept money for the time being. So what do you think? Did any of my points ring true for you? Are you studying pitch accent and phonetics? What's your experience been like? I think it'd be really interesting to try a Japanese pitch accent speed run, where we take some folks that haven't really spent much time on phonetics or pitch accent and give them some material in Emurse and see how far they can get within a 2-week period. I think by practicing a little bit every day, maybe 15 to 20 minutes every day for 2 weeks, I think from where you start now to where you end up in 2 weeks, you'd notice a big difference. So if you're interested, hit me up in the comments, and of course, subscribe for more content like this, and we'll see you in the next one.